Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Charles Sterling. I'm here for the Power BI team. Joining us today, we've got Ted Pattison, actually. If you guys made it to the Data Insight Summit, he was the one that actually helped me deliver, or actually I helped him deliver, the Dev in a Day, where he walked through the brand new, I mean, literally brand new, embedding APIs. We were doing this on Sunday, and they had gone live on Friday. So there was some interesting churn during the weekend between me and Ted, but we got it working, and it was a lot of fun. Now, over the intervening weeks, I've been actually talking to some of our top customers. Been lots of questions about app workspaces and apps. A lot of the Power BI embedding metaphors revolve around that. So I thought I would actually ask Ted to join me and walk through a brief look at Power BI embedding, starting with app workspaces. Following that, so I'm going to give Ted, 30 minutes thereabouts. Our top customers I actually had a meeting with last Wednesday asked me to walk through how to actually integrate PowerApps and Flow to make your dashboards more actionable. Specifically, if they wanted to go out and get feedback on star ratings and some comments, how would they do that directly in their dashboard? How do you collect data in a dashboard? So I'll show that in about 30 minutes. So with Ted, before you get started in the content, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about who you are. Why did I start playing with you for the Data Insights Summit, and why would people want to actually contact you after the fact?
Well, I am a lifelong educator. I've been in technical training since the early 90s, before some of you were born. And I've basically been on different waves. So one wave was the COM wave, component object model. Then I got into .NET. Then SharePoint was a real big thing to teach developers how to use it. And that's kind of a wave that's plateaued, maybe not on the rise like it used to be. And I see Power BI as the emerging platform, that's going to, employ a lot of developers over the next decade. So I just see a lot of the things that I've learned kind of come to bear when you start working with, the development environment, of the Power BI platform. So my company, Critical Path Training, has a bunch of training classes. I'll just momentarily go through them after you've heard all my content. Is that an adequate intro, Mr. Sterling?
You did a great job. I'm actually put myself on mute, so it takes me a second to come back to you. It's just me turning off of mute.
Okay. So should we go ahead and jump into the?
Yeah. Why don't you show us what this is all about? What does this stuff look like?
Okay. So what I thought I'd do is I kind of start with a couple different slides. So definitely with Power BI embedding, we are in a transition stage, and we have kind of this old world we're moving away from, this new world that we're kind of layering on top of things that are already there. So there's a lot of confusion. So what I wanted to do, I gave the same talk for Charles yesterday, but as I gave the talk, I realized that I need a little bit more. So I wrote a bunch of slides last night, and hopefully this is going to help you put some of the pieces together here. So first thing I want to do is give about a 5 introduction to what Power BI embedding means to me, and hopefully what it will mean to you. We want to talk about app workspaces and premium capacities, because that's going to be a very big part of the story. And kind of where we're heading to, is to really drive home what is Power BI embedding, with a third party, direction to it. And what we're going to see is it's going to be, something that ISVs can use, to add some very quality, oriented software, to their customers. So first of all, I have the code sample and the slides for this session all available to you. So in github.com, my company Critical Path Training has a bunch of repos. And so this one, Daily Reporter Pro, that is the name of the application I'm going to show you today. And there's also Power BI embedded.pdf inside there. So after the fact, if you want to go and take a look at these slides, they're right here, and you could, just use the server-side PDF viewer to kind of step through those. Okay, now what we want to look at is, let's start with the core foundation of the platform, which is the Power BI service, which we've all been using for the last 2 years. So as you know, it's accessible through app.powerbi.com. And what most people know is it provides a browser-based experience for licensed users of Power BI. What you might or might not know is it also provides a programmatic API for custom development. And you've been able to use that, for the last 2 years. what we'll see is there's really kind of two kinds of Power BI embedding. So we really kind of want to differentiate between first party and third party. And it's going to take me a couple more slides to really get there. Now, let's start with the big switch that we've had in licensing that happened last May. So before that, for the last couple of years, we've been living in this world where if you want to use Power BI, either as an author or a consumer, you need to have an account in Azure Active Directory. And typically that means your company has embraced Office 365 and you have an Office 365 tenant. Or it's also possible not to use Office 365 at all, but still go to Azure Active Directory, create a new tenant, add user accounts, and license them with Power BI licenses. And we've had the free license and the pro license. Many companies have been very happy with Power BI, but for some other companies, the pricing hasn't really been very good. And a lot of those companies are those that have lots of readers and very few authors. So if you have 10 people who are creating reports and 1,000 people who are reading reports, we really don't want to pay, $10 per month for these casual readers. So what the new licensing changes give us, is this way to reach a much bigger audience in a more price-effective way. So Microsoft in May announced Power BI Premium, a new licensing model. And the idea is you don't pay per user, but you pay for this idea of the resources that you use in what we call a capacity or a premium capacity. So premium capacities are useful in two different scenarios. One, you have an organization that already uses Power BI and you have licensed users who are creating the content, but we want to reach a very large audience of read-only users. So premium capacities makes a lot of sense there to be able to reach them in a more cost-effective way than with the old licensing model. Also, premium capacities are going to give ISVs the ability to use Power BI in their own applications and reach users who don't have Azure Active Directory accounts or Power BI licenses. Now, Power BI Premium, all the details and the pricing are in flux. So don't take anything you see in the slide and say, that's the price. But constantly go back, and there's a link I wanted to point out. Now, this talk is really for developers, or for companies that, you might not be a developer, you might be an architect, you might be running a company where you're going to be developing software. Power BI can be a very nice service for you to build your software on top of. Now, for developers that really want to master the Power BI platform, app workspaces, something you have to understand, how to design those, how to publish apps. So that's something we'll look at. Also, what we're not going to talk about today, but what's a very important topic is creating custom visuals. You're able to use TypeScript and libraries like D3, create some really nice things. And so some companies are happy with the out-of-the-box visuals that Power BI gives us. Other people, feel that there is a need or there's some financial incentive, to create a very custom set of visuals to use in Power BI that's possible. Okay, now there's also programming through the Power BI Service API. And that's where you can do things like upload PBIX files. You can, as of recently, you can also, automate doing things like setting refresh intervals, in your data sets. But one very specific thing that you can do with the Power BI service, is embed Power BI content. So that's what we're going to look at in this session. Now, once again, because we're in this transition stage, let me kind of err on the side of giving you too much information, to get rid of some confusion. So I always like to think about something which I call the first pancake principle. So when I cook pancakes for my kid, the pan is never hot enough, and I always have to throw away the first pancake, and the second pancake is the one you serve to your kids. So with Power BI embedded, we had a first pancake that we've basically just thrown away. And what we've had is, while the Power BI service was supplying a browser-based experience to licensed users, ISVs that wanted to reach non-licensed users had this completely different architecture that Microsoft told them to use about 1.5 years ago, which is Power BI Embedded, or what I'm going to call Power BI Embedded V1. And the idea was that you had to go to Azure and create an on-demand service, that was basically created by the Power BI team. And you then had to work with workspace collections, and you would upload PBIX files. But some of the issues is that we had to have people get Azure subscriptions. So I'm not sure if you've used Azure before, but there's this idea that someone needs a subscription to be able to create Azure services such as web apps and virtual machines. Well, all of a sudden, Power BI just became another thing you created inside of Azure. Another very important point is the pricing model of Power BI Embedded V1 was based on report sessions. And the idea is once you embed a report, that's a session. And that can be good for an hour. Unless your user likes to hit the F5 key, which then for two different users, it might be 1 report per hour, versus 38 reports per hour. Now, when we look back at Power BI V1, what are the good points? It eliminates the need to have a Power BI license to be able to reach a user. Secondly, it decouples user security from app security. So what's kind of nice about that is within your application, you probably already have a base of users. You probably already have a custom identity management system, or quite possibly you're using something other than Azure Active Directory. So you can keep using that and still kind of get into Power BI and do the things you need for Power BI Embedded. Okay, and it just opened up the platform to commercial applications. Now, the pain points that we had with this first version, it required developers to have Azure subscriptions. And all of a sudden, apart from what I'm paying, Office and Power BI, now I'm starting to pay Azure, monthly fees, which were very hard to predict. Now, another pain point is that unlike using workspaces inside of the Power BI service, there was no out-of-the-box UI. So all the work of uploading PBX files, had to be done either by writing PowerShell scripts or by writing custom code. For a developer, there was one API that I used when I wanted to talk to the Power BI service, and a separate API to talk to Power BI Embedded. Okay. A lot of people complained about the per session pricing model because it was hard to estimate costs in a predictable way. And of course, the worst thing about Power BI Embedded V1 is it's going away, it's deprecated. And if you weren't already using it, you can't use it now. Okay. And once again, the only reason I wanted to go through that is you'll hear lots of things about this where people don't know about the difference, and they'll keep talking about, well, doesn't it work like this? And no, that's the way Embedded V1 worked. Okay, so now we have Power BI Embedded version 2. So it has the same good points as V1. It eliminates the need to reach users that don't have Power BI licenses or Azure Active Directory user accounts. It decouples user security, and that is your application authenticating your users however you see fit, from the application security that we use to get into Power BI. And then once again, it opens up Power BI, as something we could use to build commercial applications. Now, what does Power BI V2 do better than V1? Well, now we basically put everything, inside of app.powerbi.com. And now there's not two separate APIs. We use a single API. Another nice thing is before this merge, when you use the Power BI Service API, you had to make direct REST calls. Now, as of May, we have a nice .NET API called the Power BI API that we can use to talk to the Power BI service, and we don't have to get down and dirty, making direct REST calls ourselves. It's abstracted away by this library. Okay, also, we now just can use the built-in user experiences to upload and manage our PBIX files. So that's huge, as far as cost of management. We have new pricing models. They're not always as cheap as you want, but they're very predictable what you're going to pay per month. And of course, now there's no need to create, manage, and monitor, any of these Azure services like we used to in the past. The last thing I want to point out is the term Power BI Embedded means something different to everybody. I can't really use that term anymore because a lot of people say, I thought that was disbanded. Well, so I just kind of refer to the embedding features in Power BI is the way I'm going to refer to it going forward, just to kind of get rid of ambiguity.
And Ted, one thing I see on our internal lists all the time is the publish to web is often referred to as embedding because it actually says it in dialogue. I actually had 2 messages of that yesterday of, hey, I'm using Power BI. Hey, I'm using Power BI Embedded. And you look at the URL and it's clear that they've used publish to web. So yeah, another confusion point.
But, you cannot argue that they're wrong.
They are absolutely right.
I embedded something that paid with Power BI. So I just, the vagueness of the term,
Yes.
has to be, noted, and, tighten up how you articulate things about Power BI, I guess is kind of what we're getting at.
Yep.
Okay, now let's look at the embeddable resource types. So I'm a custom developer. I'm building my custom application. I want to embed things inside there. So reports are definitely, the best thing that we're going to get. And we're going to have a fully, interactive experience. Okay, let's go ahead and jump into a demo. And in this demo right here, let me go ahead and kind of move over to our sample application. But there's this idea that here's my custom application. Now, one thing that I did is I don't really have any user security. I've kind of left it open. The idea is when you build this application, you'll authenticate your users any way you see fit. So we're not kind of forcing any authentication. I just kind of have Walter White, from the lab, as our main person that's logged in. But now I can use the Power BI service API to figure out what reports. User clicks on a particular report right here. And so what's going to happen is that user is going to be able to then look at the report right on my particular page. Okay, now let's look at this. If I kind of hover over something, hey, I get IntelliSense. If I go to my individual slicers here, you have a full interactive experience, as you're working through, so that's really neat. Okay, it gets better. In the past, using this JavaScript API that you write your code against the embedded report, we've been able to do things like decide to either show the user navigation or take it away, or we can, show the filter pane, or we can take it away. But you're also able to work with this report as an embeddable JavaScript object that throws off events. And so if I don't like the navigation scheme that's kind of built into a Power BI report, I can get rid of it and replace it with my own. Here's just an example of, being able to move through the pages in a report and provide a much better experience inside there. Furthermore, let me turn navigation back on here. Let's say someone decides to kind of click through here. Note that this menu is kind of keeping in sync because the report is throwing out events that I can trap and figure out what page the user, is now on. Okay, how much would you pay for this service now? But wait, it gets better. So what they've now done is to also give us a editing function. So the idea that you can now kind of jump into edit mode, or your user can jump into edit mode and now can move things around inside here. Let's go down here and go to data colors. I'll pick Charles's favorite color right here. Let's go ahead, let's go back here and choose save. Okay, and now let's embed another report. And now let's go back to that first report. And so what I want you to see is that, it's not just showing reports to users, but truly it is giving your users self-service BI capabilities inside there. Okay, you're not impressed yet, I can tell. So let me click on new. Not only can you allow your users to edit existing reports, if I use the API, here I have a flow that kind of presents the user with the different data sets inside of an app workspace. A user picks one of these, and you can use that data set and create a brand new report inside here. Now, as I'm going through this, let me bring up this concept of white labeling. So I'm a third-party ISV. I've got 100 different customers, and I tell them they pay me a certain amount per month, and I give them a great reporting service. They have no idea that I'm using Power BI. Maybe someone looks at this UI and says, I don't think Ted did this all himself. But as far as me, when I'm out at the bar, I'm telling people I did this all myself. But just the idea of white labeling and the fact that the Power BI team is on the same page to allow you to embed their things, without them having to stamp their identity all over it, gets to be an appealing part for this particular thing right here. Now, let me go ahead one more time here. And let's say that the user creates a new report. The user now goes and does something, such as creates, something that's, really nice inside there. And now let me add a second page and just to do something, real quick here to demonstrate a point. Let me go back here. Now, the way the model works is you still have a new report. But what you're able to do is you're able to trap the save as event handler. And so if someone names this report 999, and hit save, what you're able to do is, not after the report saves, redirect and then embed this report. And now the user can begin working on that inside there. Okay. So, what I wanted to show before I jumped into the code is what can you do with it? So the idea that you have reports that provide the full interactive user experience and also allows self-service capabilities of editing existing reports, creating new reports. Now with dashboards, let's go ahead and take a look at the different dashboards I have inside here. And with these particular dashboards, I'll go ahead and click on one. So what you're going to find is the experience is not as interactive. There is some interactivity, in the fact that, as you hover over, you get things like IntelliSense, but unlike going to the Power BI service, clicking on something, will not redirect you to that particular report, nor should it in a custom application where you want that particular control. So you can embed reports, you can embed dashboards. Note that there is support for real-time dashboards. They will automatically update. The one other option is to embed dashboard tiles individually. So if you have a dashboard that has 10 tiles, you only want 3 of them, or you want some type of special click on tile and go somewhere special behavior inside there, doing dashboard tiles can do that. Okay, note that with dashboard tiles, though, they do not have real-time update support. You have to use basically the fully embedded dashboard to be able to get that. Okay, so now that we've kind of seen the app, let's walk through and talk about some pieces of it. So what I wanted to do is look at the big picture before we go into the details. So the first step is the user launches a browser and navigates to your app. The second step is that your app has to interact with Azure Active Directory. The idea is that you have to authenticate a particular user, and I'll leave that vague for now. And after you authenticate a particular user, you get back an access token. Once you've got that access token, you can use that and you can talk to the Power BI service. Now, once you can talk to the Power BI service, what you're able to do is you're able to call in and say, I need embedding information for this particular report or this dashboard or this tile. And you're going to take that information and you're going to push it back into the browser. Now, when you talk to the Power BI service, you obviously use the Power BI service API. When you've taken all this data for an embedded session and pushed it back to the client, well, then we use something which is called the Power BI JavaScript API. Now, if you go back over a year before we had the JavaScript API, you had to do a lot of low-level work with iframes to make this work. And so as the Power BI JavaScript API has matured over the last year, you don't even see the iframe anymore. You just give it the details and you say report.embed and it does all the work. Okay, and then after that, the iframe establishes a direct connection to the Power BI service. Now, I'd like to make an analogy to Jim Lang. Chuck, you remember Jim Lang, right? Does anyone remember Jim Lang?
I don't.
Oh, come on.
Tell me who Jim Lang is.
Okay, well, let me go here. Okay, so if we go back and we look at Jim Lang, and who is Jim Lang? Jim Lang was the original host of the dating game. So what does that have to do with this? So remember the dating game. Let's go back here and just to kind of refresh our memory right here. The dating game is when you had 3 contestants. Let's go down here and kind of find, something where we had these 3 eligible bachelorettes and 1 eligible bachelor. And the idea of Jim Lang was he'd connect 2 people, but Jim Lang did not actually go on the date. So I'm trying to make this connection. Let's go through one more time. So your app is Jim Lang. It gets the access token. It gets what it needs. It connects the user and the Power BI service, but then it doesn't go on the date. It drops out of the picture. So the idea here is if I go back here and I've got this report. So one more time, let me go back to this report right here. Let me go ahead and open up this report. at this point right here, what we have is this picture right here, just an iframe connected directly to the Power BI service. And every time the user is kind of doing something like that, it's not going through your application at all. So that's a pretty important piece of the top level architecture to understand, is that you kind of set it and then you get out of the way and you just let the session take place. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that typically we create access tokens that are good for 1 hour. So there is this messy issue that after 1 hour, the access token is going to time out. I'm not going to get into those details here. I just kind of wanted to point that out. Now, let's differentiate between two types of embedding. So you'll hear about third-party embedding versus first-party. First-party authenticates the current user. So you have lots of different users. Anyone comes to your particular application, you write the code to authenticate that user's identity with Azure Active Directory, and then you get an access token based on that user. And the idea is that your code can then access anything that user has permissions to see. Okay. Another observation is that first-party embedding always means that the user needs to have an Azure Active Directory user account, and it also needs to have a Power BI license. So typically what we care about is third-party embedding. So with third-party embedding, we can't use the user's identity because the user doesn't have a license. So instead, the architecture that we have for Power BI embedding today says that we create a master user account. So you need to create an account in Azure Active Directory. You need to then give that account a Power BI Pro license. And then, as we're going to see in the next section, you're going to have to make that user an administrator of the app workspace inside there. And so one question is can I just use the account that I have? And the answer is yes, you can. But probably, the larger and more secure your environment is, the more that's going to be a bad idea, and that you just want to create a user account that's really just a daemon account inside there. Okay. Now, when we look at first-party embedding versus third-party embedding, what scenarios do we use for first-party embedding? Well, an organization where they want to do some special development for users that already have licenses. But what I'll say is there's not as much motivation for first-party embedding, because every single user that you could reach already has access to the browser and the Power BI service user experience through the browser. So unless you're going beyond that or doing something that that user experience can't do already, it makes no sense to do custom development. With third-party embedding, you got nothing until you start developing. So scenarios where users don't have Power BI licenses, applications already have a custom identity provider or some identity provider, other than Azure Active Directory. Okay, so now with that background, let's get a little bit more, into app workspaces right here. Chuck, I realize I'm going a little bit long here. I hope, I think probably about 10 more minutes, hopefully.
Okay.
But sorry if I'm eating into your space a little bit here. Those new slides. Okay, now with app workspaces, let's go back here. Let's go ahead and jump into Power BI. Now, if you've used the new user interface in Power BI, you'll know the things that used to be called group workspaces are now called app workspaces. Let's go ahead and create a new one. So I'm going to create this new app workspace, and I'll just call this Ted's AWS. So as Chuck now knows, AWS is now the new acronym for app workspace. It means nothing other than that. Note that when you create the inside here, let me go ahead and add something inside.
Always gonna make me laugh.
I can add a particular user account, and I can make this a admin inside here. Okay, and now that I've done that, I've got something that I can start populating with PBIX files. So if I go back up here and I start loading in my PBIX files, I can basically build out data sets and reports. And then I can go ahead and through the browser, I can add others. Now, I've already got an app workspace here I'm going to switch over to. Now, note the diamond. The diamond means your app workspace, is inside of a special place. So if we go a couple more slides. Let me go past this one and get to premium capacities. So when you have a Power BI workspace, it can run in one of two possible environments. We have shared capacities, And the idea is that your resources and processing runs in a place that's shared by other organizations. Now, the idea of a premium capacity is in that data center in the cloud, you have hardware that's dedicated to you and not shared with anyone else. Okay, premium capacities have gone also by the name of dedicated capacities, but the idea is it acts as a dedicated resource for a single organization. We can now have file uploads much bigger than 1 gigabyte. You can have, more frequent data refreshes. And also, each premium capacity node, the slide should have node in there, defines its own set of admins. Now, when a company buys Power BI premium licensing, you have to have at least one node to take advantage of it. And the idea is you pay per month for each node. Now, you'll notice that some nodes start with P, some start with EM. So P nodes are the more expensive ones because they're for non-licensed users and for licensed users. So they can be used by large companies, where we have 10,000 users that have the free Power BI license. The P ones are going to be, I'm sorry, I think I've got this, well, I got one of these backwards in here, but one is only for embedding, so will only be used for ISVs, we're non-licensed users. Now, a couple of details. One is when you talk to, when your app talks to Power BI, you have to be registered with Azure. So if I go back here and kind of quickly look at the Azure portal, while you don't have to create any Azure services, you are going to have to create kind of the equivalent of a user account for your application, which is an application registration account. So whether you have an Azure subscription and you have access to this portal, or you're able to, some other way kind of manage creating and configuring these user accounts, that's what's going to be important. Now, if I look at this right here, here's the Daily Reporter Pro. Notice that this application, has a GUID, and also there is a set of permissions inside here, that are going to be important. So not only do you have to create the Azure AD application, you then have to configure permissions in Power BI. Now, there's a kicker in here. And the kicker is that when we're doing third-party embedding, you've got this master account. It has to authenticate just by passing a username and password directly to Azure Active Directory. However, Azure Active Directory, sees the style of authentication we're using kind of as the older legacy style. So one of the things it wants to do is when a user first uses your application, it's going to bring up an interactive page and make the user consent to those permissions. The problem is with your master account, you don't have an interactive login. You're just passing a username and password, but what can happen is it will try to interact with that user and get consent, and it will fail. So there is this grant permissions button right here, which is very important because it's one of the only ways that you can basically bless the account, which is your master user account, to begin using things inside there. Okay, now, but let's say we've gone through and we've created this application. Adam Saxton has some pretty good information, up on the Power BI site about step-by-step going through and creating these, but realize that when you're using third-party embedding, kind of we're using the old legacy user credentials flow, and worse than user credentials flow, it's direct user credential flow, meaning that there's no interactive user. If you're using first-party embedding, note that you'd use one of these two. You'd either use the implicit grant flow or the authorization code grant flow inside there. Okay, so here's just a little chart, as far as first party versus third party. And if you're using third party, you are basically using a master user account and you're authenticating with direct user credentials flow inside there. Now, if I go back to this app and I kind of just give kind of a quick walkthrough inside, notice that here's the client ID. So basically that is the application I've registered inside of Azure Active Directory. There's the app workspace ID. If I go back over here and we kind of look at the workspace that I'm in, Note that, there's lots of different ways we can get the workspace ID, but it's just the GUID. And then you need the username and password of your master user account. So remember the details. This account has to be licensed with a pro license. This account has to be configured. If I go back to this app workspace, and back in the app workspace, we go down to edit, and we look at this, you can see this user has been made an admin of the app workspace that has the content inside. And then finally, we have to make sure that consent has already been granted for this particular user. Now, once that's the case, you can see, I'm just gonna leave it to you to go through a lot of this code right here. But the code, once you use the Active Directory authentication library, is not very hard. To take user password credentials and get a access token back inside there. If you're using this new model, which is the Power BI Service API with the .NET library on top of it, there's this Power BI client that you're able to work with. Now, let's say that I want to get reports. For instance, here's the user back here. And let's say the user is not on the reports page right now. I'm going to open up Fiddler, and I'm going to go back here and click on reports. So, what you can see here is that now I have server-side code that said, give me all your information about reports. So it's pulling back things like embed URLs and also on data sets. So I need to pull back information on data sets. If I want to allow her to be able to create a new report, I need to have a data set to base that on. But then the idea is that once you get this information back here and someone clicks on this, well, now it's all client-side code, that is taking over and doing the embedding work inside there. So the last piece I want to show you down here is if I go into the app folder, there is an app.ts file. So here's some TypeScript code that I wrote. And the idea is that as your code runs inside here, you're going to call into Power BI embed, and you've already passed things over, such as the embed URL and the access token. Now, one extra point, and that is if you're using first-party embedding, you get an access token for the user, and you just basically pass that back. And the idea is that, the access, token will then be of type AAD. However, if you're using a master user account, that account has lots of permissions. You don't want to just hand that access token back. So when we're using Power BI embedded, let's go back here. And what I want to show, is this one other call that we have inside here. And that call is if there is a current report, let's generate what we call an embed token. Okay, a good analogy is my kid wants to go out to dinner. The last thing I'm going to do is give her my credit card. I'll give her a $20 bill. I know how much she can spend. So the idea is we don't pass back the full access token. We pass back a token that can do the embedding that has, far more restricted access. Also, when you create these, you can specify whether you're creating an embed token for viewing only or for some of the self-service, such as embedding inside here. Okay, so I think I've gone over about 10 minutes right here, but hopefully, I've done enough to kind of step you through, being able to get up and running and working with the JavaScript API. One last thing I'll do before I give back to Charles is just another call out. If you like this type of low-level information, my company Critical Path Training has Power BI Bootcamp and Power BI Developer Bootcamp. CriticalPathTraining.com, has the information about these, and we teach in Tampa. We teach remotely. We're also over in the UK, in London this fall, October, November. We'd love to see you for some of that training. So with that, Charles, I think I will now stop sharing and pass control back to you, sir.
All right, great. Can you hear me okay?
I can indeed.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing. I'd like to verify that that's what you guys are seeing. Ted, is that what you're seeing as you're seeing my computer?
No, I'm just guessing you have this number 986.92 on your screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay. All right, guys. So I actually had a meeting last Wednesday with our top customers, and they love the idea of being able to take and make their dashboards interactive, collect data, going out and having customers tell them what they think is happening with their dashboards itself. And I said, well, that's actually easy with PowerApps, and I'm more than happy to show you and the rest of the world how. And that's actually how I did this. So what you should be seeing is a dashboard with, as Ted said, a number 986.92. That's the average price of the computers that I'm selling. And this little widget I built saying, how happy are you with the dashboard? Or maybe it doesn't say that. Maybe we need to add that because it actually doesn't say what these stars are for. Well, let's go ahead and say, you know, it doesn't look all that good. It doesn't use the right colors. There's no branding, and it doesn't tell you what this is for. I'm going to give you a 1. I'm not happy about it. And, oh, it looks like I forgot to check the checkbox that says we can contact you. And maybe I've decided that it's actually not as bad, and I give you a 3. I don't know if you notice this, but these tiles are actually showing up in real time, and I'm collecting this data. Things that people probably didn't think you could do from Power BI. And the truth is, you really can't do it from Power BI. This is actually PowerApps embedded into it. Now, today, I'm doing it from a dashboard because I'm using actually something called a web content tile. And we're gonna build that in a second. But going forward, we actually have the team working on making a Power BI visual that will actually encapsulate or host a Power App. And that way you can interact with it directly from Power BI. I'm going to repeat that once more because there's a lot of powers in that statement. The team is working on a visual that will host a Power App so you can display it in your Power BI dashboards and reports. Additionally, and it was supposed to be live today, it looks like we've actually been postponed, you can actually go into your PowerApps application and host one of these visuals in your PowerApps. But let's show you how I did this one. Right off the bat, I am actually interacting with it with something called Microsoft Flow. And before I get into how I push the data into Microsoft Flow, let me show you some of the things that you can do with Flow. For instance, I've actually got this card, and I'm going to go ahead and set up an alert. And if the price is above, let's say that it's above $24,000. Let's actually make it $25,000 because we haven't hit there yet. 25, is that 25,000? Yes. Okay, and then I'm going to call this one Ted's webinar. Okay, Ted, you have to remember that name. Okay, and Mark, who's on the call right now, I don't know if you just saw that email. You're not supposed to actually be showing my email, but that was actually Adam Wilson replying to you about the EM capacity. So you should actually have an answer in your inbox right now. Talk about real-time support. Okay, let's go ahead and save and close this. Now, I want to go actually take action on it, not just send an email, maybe go out and notify my manager if I'm way over in our total sales. So I'm going to open up a new tab. I'm going to go to flows.microsoft.com. And I'm going to go ahead and go to My Flows. And I'm going to go ahead and choose Create from Blank. And I realize I'm going through this pretty quick. You can thank Ted for that. And I'm going to go out and set a trigger to be Power BI. What the Power BI trigger is going to do is it's going to take a look at all of my alerts across my entire tenant. So in here, I should actually see one called Ted's Webinar. There it is. And inside of my Ted's Webinar, I can go out and add a new step. So basically, if I go out and say, let's say that, actually, let's do something first. I realize that we're tight for time, but go away. I want you to not be there. Okay, what we'll do is we'll actually go ahead and send an email to me if this alert gets toggled. So here's me, and the subject is going to be the value and the title, and inside the body is going to be the URL. And I could actually go out and say, we are over our projection. Yay. Okay. At that point, what I wanted to do a second ago is actually add a condition where I could go ahead and say the value is the value of the alert. And if it is not just over 25,000, but maybe 50,000. So we've blown away our numbers. If it's over 50,000, instead of just sending email to me, I'm going to go ahead and maybe, I don't know, tweet it to the planet. Or you get the idea. I could go out and post a tweet, and et cetera, et cetera. In this case, since we're little bit tight on time. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this and just send an email to myself. But you get the idea. If it was way over, send a tweet. And I wonder if I can actually save it with that condition incompleted. Heads flow. Okay, so how does this relate back into sending data from these little stars into these tiles? Well, in addition to triggering on alerts, I can actually go ahead and trigger on key presses or button presses in PowerApps. So let's go ahead and build that Power App. So I'm going to go to PowerApps.com and sign in. You know, Ted, a lesson for new players is that they should turn off their alerts. Seems like having done 2 of these webinars this morning, I would have known that, but anyways. Okay.
You're going to want to have less to lose than those young people. They should definitely turn off their alerts.
I want to go ahead and set this to be tablet layout. So I want it to be landscape since we're going to embed it into a dashboard. And we're going to make it quite small, as you saw. So I'm going to make these controls very, very large. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a button, and not just a button, a big button. Yeah, that's a good place for it. I'm going to go to advanced and more properties, and let's find the font in here. Here's the font, and something along the size of, I don't know, 38 seems like a good button size. And rather than, where does it say button? Let's see if we can find that. Oh, here it is. We're going to change that to say submit. Actually, let's get it to say submit your feedback for this dashboard, because I didn't have that before. So maybe make this button a little bit bigger. Okay. And additionally, I have got that star rating. So I want to collect, we typically here on my team do an NPS score. So let's go ahead and set the max to 10. NPS is done on a scale of 10. And maybe set the default of 5. Or if I want to be kind of cheeky, we could set it to the default of 9. You know, actually, I was on a webinar with one of my teammates, and they'd done something like, you can't even do it here. They'd actually set the scale to where you couldn't even do the bottom of the scale. A little cheeky, but that's okay. What else do we want on there? Probably, do we want to actually collect their information, or can we contact them? So we could go out and say, where was it? Contact. Oh, here it is. It's right here. I can change it here as well. Can we contact you? And probably let them know where we're going to plan on contacting them. Maybe do something like, how about user, and we'll do email. So this is how and where we're going to contact you. What else might we have in here? It's probably enough for right now. Oh, maybe the dashboard that they're looking at. Actually, no, I'll hard copy that. Let's say that this is done at this point. So let's go ahead and save this one, save as. We'll call it Ted's NPS. Ted's NPS. By the way, a lot of people are asking, and they may be asking this in the chat, what language is that I'm typing? It's actually, it doesn't have a name, but we've been calling it the Excel language. Everything that we had to make up from scratch, we take a look at Excel and say, what would they do? In most cases, we didn't have to make up any of this. We could actually take and lift exactly what Excel's already doing. So what we need to do is go ahead and empower this button to go out and push that data into those little tiles that we were looking at. And those are actually Power BI data sets. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to Action, and I'm going to choose the Flow button. And by the way, if you guys are familiar with PowerApps, this is actually brand new. You were not able to use the web client and actually use Flow. So this is something that we had actually added a week and a half ago, I think it was. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and add a brand new flow. And you saw me create one a second ago where the trigger was a Power BI alert. You'll see that this one's already set up the trigger to be a PowerApps button push. And I want it to be the PowerApps NPS button. And I want it to be Ted's Power App MPS button. Okay, so what are we going to do? Based on that button press, I'm going to go ahead and push that data into Power BI. So you'll see that this is a different Power BI than I chose before. Before it was the trigger, now it's the action. So it's saying, what workspaces am I working with? I'm actually did this session very similar to this at Microsoft Data Insight Summit. So I'm using that workspace. Which of my data sets I should have one called NPS? There we go. And which of my tables? You only get one option, which is real-time data. And then what it's going to do is it's going to go out and grab those columns. So where am I getting that? Let's show you that. If I click here, go to data sets, go to NPS, you should see, let's click this edit button. What you should see is the exact columns matching the exact columns here. So those should be one and the same. What we're going to do is we're going to ask for the score in PowerApps. We're going to ask for the email. We're going to ask for the date and can we contact you and the dashboard name. Okay, perfect. At this point, let's go ahead and create the flow. And we're going to go back to my PowerApps. We should find something called Ted's, where is it? Ted's flow? Oh, why am I not seeing it?
This sounds like a medical condition.
NPS, no, that wasn't that one. Oh, here it is. I just missed it. So when I click on the button, I want to activate this flow. And we said that we are going to ask for a couple different things for Ted's flow. Yes, this medical condition. And the first thing it says is the score. So where are we going to get that score? Well, we drug over those little stars. I didn't rename them. Shame on me. And it's called rating 1 by default. I'm going to pass in that value. The second argument looks like it's the email address. So in this case, it is, what is it, that first label? Yes, the label text. And I did that so that way the person could actually change it if they want to overwrite what email address that we're going to contact them from. The third argument is the add rows to data set date. Oh, I didn't actually have a date on there, so we'll just actually use the date function from Excel or in PowerApps. Can we contact? That one's actually the checkbox. And we'll pass in the value for that. And the dashboard. In this case, I didn't give it a text. So what we'll do is say that the dashboard is Ted's dashboard. Okay. At this point, if I run this, it's not checking any checkboxes now. Let's see if I can play some screen gymnastics here. I'll make this a little bit smaller. We'll move this over here. I'll put this here and come back. There we go. And we want to go to the dashboards, and it was called Get Devices. And what we should see is if we scroll this way, there we are. Okay, so I should be able to check this to be a 10. Can we contact you? And if I look at this 3 in this thing, I should be able to see it going up to a 10. And this one actually should be going up in a second as well. Let's do one more at 9 and watch this 3.41. And that should be going up as well. So we're really, really close. All we have to do now is get this, oops, in here. How do you do that? Well, I'm going to go back to my browser windows I had open up PowerApps, and you're going to click on the ellipsis and click on details and grab the web link. Now, in my environment, I'm running an int machine, a test machine, if you will, that's in the dev environment. I actually have to preface this with the word preview. You do not have to do that because you're not in our dev environment. But now I've got the right URL. So this is the URL that we want to use. If I go back into my Power BI dashboard and I go ahead and choose Add Tile, Web Content, Next. I need this to be an iframe. This is not a properly formatted iframe. This is what you would use if you want to run it regular. So let's go ahead and apply that and grab the rest of the goo to make it a good iframe. So we'll actually steal the rest of the iframe HTML from this one. And I do have this on a blog post by Charles Sterling. So if you look at my Charles Sterling blog post, you can actually see the rest of this hide nav, the iframe, the heights, and whatnot. So I'm going to go ahead and copy all of that, cancel, find the one that we just created. Where is that one? Here it is. And you like my notes, Ted? I'm using all these files as snippets of code.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, grab that code that we just did and replace
It's the opposite of OneNote.
Yeah, OneNote works a little bit better, a little bit better experience. Paste the one that we just did, apply that, and now if I actually go out and grab it here and move it up way, 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 way up. I played a little bit more with the application attributes to get it to resize and fill better. But I should be able to, if I could scroll off to the right, there we go. Go here. No, actually, I just need to resize it. What am I doing? And resize it and back. It should look a little bit like the one that I did earlier. So I can go out and now give it a 1 and hit here, and I should be able to, what happened? Did I not click the button? Well, it was working a second ago. I'm not certain why it's not working now. I wonder if this one's not working. Somehow we've lost these. We're going to wait for a second for this one. No idea why it's not working. But anyways, you get the idea. This is how you take and integrate flow to alerts in Power BI, going out and making it much more actionable, using conditions to go out and say, I can send it to different people. I can do Twitter. I can do Facebook. There are over 100 different actions that you can take based on these triggers. You can also, as a pro developer, like Ted was actually focusing on, I can take all of my REST endpoints, build Swagger files, and make all of those REST endpoints available to Flow. Why would you want to do that? Flow is very much focused on non-developers, enabling them to go out and do fairly sophisticated automation. So my name is Charles Sterling. Hopefully Ted's been looking at the Q&A and we all answered up there. If you have any more questions, go ahead and ask them down at the bottom. Otherwise, next week we've got Karthik going out and doing application live. No, he's looking at the Visual Studio, the editor for PowerApps with Karthik next week. And then after that, I'm out fishing, as I was telling Ted. So thank you very much. Ted, did you want to say goodbye?
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for spending some time with us today. Thank you, Charles, for hosting, as always.
And where's the next time people can see you? You're doing the user group this week, or?
Let's see. No, we have some training coming up in Tampa.
In Tampa. Okay, and what's the date for that?
Next week.
Next week?
In Canada.
And if you happen to be in town, I'm actually doing the SharePoint user group tonight. So there you go. Okay, guys, you guys have a great day, and I will make sure and look at the Q&A window in case I'd missed anything.